I was hitchhiking through Montana when my driver told me to hide. I should have asked why he was driving that road at that time of night. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what happened afterward, not the things I saw. Just that one moment when I stood on the side of a highway in Montana, thumb out, backpack on my shoulder, and a stranger pulled over. I thought I was lucky. I didn't realize I was getting into someone else's problem. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 29 years old, originally from Ohio. At the time this happened, I was taking a break from everything. I had quit my job about 2 months earlier, ended a relationship that had been falling apart for a while, and honestly, I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. I had always wanted to travel. Not the normal kind of travel. I wasn't interested in hotels, tourist attractions, or carefully planned vacations. I wanted the kind of trip where you didn't know exactly where you would sleep that night. The kind where you met random people, saw places most people never saw. So I bought a cheap backpack, packed some clothes, a camera, some camping gear, and started heading west. I spent a few weeks moving through different states, Colorado, Wyoming, then eventually Montana. And Montana was different. If you've never been there, it's hard to explain how big it feels. You can drive for hours and see nothing but mountains, open fields, and roads that seem like they disappear into nowhere. Beautiful, but also unsettling. Because eventually you realize how far away you are from anyone. There are places where if something goes wrong, nobody is coming quickly. I was traveling north toward a small town outside the western part of the state. I won't say the exact location because, honestly, I don't know if I want attention drawn to the area. The plan was simple. Find a ride, get to the next town, find somewhere cheap to stay. The problem with hitchhiking is that eventually you have to trust strangers, and most of the time, people are good. That is something I still believe. The guy who picked me up wasn't obviously suspicious. That's what makes the whole thing harder to explain. It wasn't some creepy-looking person in an old van. It wasn't someone who immediately gave me a bad feeling. He looked completely normal. It was around 5:30 in the evening. The sun was starting to drop behind the mountains, and I had been standing near the highway for maybe 40 minutes. A few cars passed. Most ignored me. One truck slowed down, then kept going. Then an older dark green pickup pulled over ahead of me. The driver rolled down the window. "Where you headed?" I told him the town I was trying to reach. He looked toward the road ahead, then back at me. "You got someone waiting?" I said no. Just trying to get there before dark. He nodded. "Hop in." I thanked him and threw my backpack in the bed. When I got inside, I noticed the truck was surprisingly clean. The guy looked to be maybe in his late 50s, grey beard, baseball cap, work jacket, the kind of person you would expect to see fixing a fence or working on a ranch. He introduced himself as Mark. We made small talk, nothing unusual. He asked where I was from, how long I had been traveling, where I was staying. I answered casually. Then he asked something that stuck with me. "You camping tonight?" I said I wasn't sure. He looked at me for a second, then said, "You probably shouldn't." I laughed a little. I thought he was joking. "Why?" He kept looking at the road. "Just wouldn't recommend it around here." I asked if there were bears. He shook his head. "No." The way he said it was strange. Not scared, more like he was choosing his words carefully. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. A few minutes passed. The radio was playing quietly. The mountains outside the window were turning dark. Then we turned off the main highway. I noticed immediately. The road got smaller. No signs, no lights, just a narrow road surrounded by trees. I looked at him. "I thought you were taking me into town?" "I am," he said it calmly. "Shortcut." I didn't think much of it. Montana has a lot of roads like that. But after about 10 minutes, I noticed something. We hadn't passed another vehicle. Not one. No houses, no buildings, nothing. Just trees. Finally, I asked, "How much longer?" "About 20 minutes. Then he went quiet. The kind of quiet where you know someone is thinking about something. I looked over at him. "Everything okay?" He nodded. "Yeah." Another minute passed. Then he suddenly said, "When we get around this next bend, don't talk." I thought I misheard him. "What?" He kept his eyes on the road. "If I tell you to get down, you get down." I stared at him. "Why?" This time he looked directly at me. And I remember his expression. Because it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Like he had seen something before. "Just trust me." I didn't answer, because at that moment I wasn't sure if I should trust him or be worried about him. We drove another few hundred yards, then he slowed down. Ahead of us on the side of the road was a vehicle, an SUV, parked halfway off the road. No lights, no hazards, just sitting there. Mark immediately slowed down. His entire body changed. The relaxed guy who had been making conversation disappeared. He leaned forward over the steering wheel. I asked, "Do you know them?" He didn't answer. He just whispered, "Get down." For a second I thought he was joking. Then he said it again, louder, "Get down now." I dropped below the dashboard. My heart started pounding. I could hear the engine idling. The truck slowed almost to a stop. Then Mark turned off the headlights. We were sitting there in complete darkness. I could barely see anything. I whispered, "What is happening?" He put a finger to his lips. Then we heard it. A door opening, not from the SUV, from somewhere else, outside. A sound from the trees, a vehicle door, then footsteps. Slow footsteps, coming toward the road. Mark reached over and grabbed my shoulder. Not aggressively, just enough to make sure I stayed down. And then he whispered something I'll never forget. "Whatever you do, don't let them know you're in here." I felt my stomach drop. Because suddenly I wasn't worried about some random person on the road. I was worried about the fact that the man who picked me up seemed to know exactly what was happening, and he had been waiting for it. For the next few seconds, neither of us moved. The truck was completely dark, engine off, lights off. Two strangers sitting in silence on an empty mountain road, and outside, someone was walking toward us. I could hear the gravel shifting under their boots, slow, not rushing, almost like they already knew we were there. I looked over at Mark. His face was barely visible in the darkness, but I could tell he was listening. Not guessing, listening. Like he was trying to identify the person by the way they walked. The footsteps stopped, right outside the driver's side window. I stopped breathing. I could see a faint shape through the glass. A person standing there, just standing. Not knocking, not saying anything, just waiting. I remember thinking, this is insane. A normal person would have approached the vehicle, asked if we needed help, something, but whoever was outside wasn't doing that. They were just watching. Then Mark slowly reached down and grabbed something from beside his seat. For a moment I thought it was a weapon. It wasn't. It was his phone. He typed something. I felt my own phone vibrate. He had sent me a message. I opened it. It said, "Do not look up." I stared at the screen. I didn't understand. Then another message came. Seriously. I don't know why that scared me more than anything else. Because if Mark was afraid enough to warn me not to look, so I didn't want to know what I would see. The person outside moved. The footsteps went around the front of the truck. Slowly, then stopped again. This time near the passenger side, right where I was hiding. I could see their shadow moving across the dashboard. I was completely frozen. Then something happened that still bothers me. The person outside tapped on the window. 3 times. Not hard, just enough to get attention. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at Mark. He shook his head. "No, don't move. Don't answer." The tapping stopped. A few seconds passed. Then the person outside said, "Mark?" A man's voice. Calm, normal. That was the worst part. It wasn't threatening. It sounded like someone who expected to be answered. Mark didn't respond. The voice came again. "Mark, I know you're in there." My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. I couldn't understand what was happening. If this was someone Mark knew, why were we hiding? If it was dangerous, why did this person sound so calm? The person outside walked back toward the driver's side, then said, "You don't have to make this weird." Mark finally moved, just slightly. He reached for the keys. I thought he was going to start the truck. Instead, he started the engine. The sudden sound shocked everyone. The person outside stepped back. Mark immediately turned the lights on, put the truck in reverse, and drove. Fast. The tires threw gravel everywhere. I grabbed the door handle. We flew backward down the road. I could hear something hitting the side of the truck. Maybe rocks, maybe branches, I don't know. Mark didn't slow down. Not until we were back on the main road. Not until the trees started thinning. Not until I saw highway lights again. Only then did he pull over. For almost a full minute, neither of us said anything. Finally, I asked, "What was that?" Mark kept staring straight ahead. "I don't know what you saw." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "I mean, you don't need to know." That answer bothered me, a lot. Because I wasn't a kid. I wasn't someone who couldn't handle the truth. I had been sitting in that truck just as scared as he was. I told him, "You picked me up. You brought me there. The least you can do is explain." He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "Years ago, I used to drive that road home every night." "Okay. There were people out there." I asked, "Who?" He shook his head. "That's them. I don't know." He told me that a few years earlier, he had started noticing strange things around that area. Vehicles parked where they shouldn't be. People watching from the tree line. Lights moving through the woods. At first he assumed it was hunters, or teenagers, or people trespassing. Until one night he stopped. He said he saw a group of people near the road, and they weren't doing anything, just standing there, watching cars pass. He reported it. Nothing happened. A few weeks later, someone broke into his truck. Nothing was stolen. The glove box was open. The seats moved, like someone had been sitting inside. After that, he stopped using that road. Until that night. The night he picked me up. I asked, "So who was outside the truck?" He looked at me. "I don't know." "Then why did you know to hide?" He was quiet. Then he said, "Because they weren't surprised to see me." That sentence stayed with me, because it explained something I hadn't thought about. The person outside hadn't walked up randomly. They had recognized him. They knew his truck. They knew who he was. I asked him why he didn't just drive away immediately. He said, "Because I needed to know if you were still inside." I didn't understand. He explained. When he first saw the SUV, he thought it was abandoned. But then he saw movement. Someone standing beside it, watching the road. When he slowed down, they noticed him. And that's when he knew something was wrong. He said, "They weren't waiting for me." I looked at him. Then who were they waiting for? He didn't answer. We sat there for a while. Then he offered to take me to the nearest town. I almost said no. But honestly, I didn't want to be alone anymore. He dropped me off at a motel near the highway. Before I got out, he gave me one piece of advice. "Don't tell people the wrong parts." I asked, "What does that mean?" He said, "People hear a story like this and they want the exciting answer. They want monsters. They want something impossible. But sometimes the scariest thing is just knowing another person is out there and you don't know what they want." Then he drove away. I never saw him again. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what actually happened. I looked at maps. I searched the area. I tried to find news reports, anything. I couldn't find anything about Mark or the road. Or the SUV. Maybe that was normal. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe the person outside was harmless. Maybe Mark was paranoid. Those are the explanations I try to believe. But there is one thing I still can't explain. When I got dropped off, I realized my backpack zipper was open. I knew I had closed it. Inside was my camera, my wallet, my notebook. Nothing was missing. Except one thing. A small paper receipt I had kept from a gas station 2 days earlier. It had my travel route written on the back. The places I planned to visit. The roads I planned to take. I know that sounds insignificant. But I remember because I wondered, why would someone open my bag, take only that, and leave everything else? I never found out. And maybe I never will. But every time I hear people talk about hitchhiking stories, they usually talk about the danger of getting into a stranger's car. That's not the part that bothers me anymore. The part that bothers me is this. Sometimes the stranger who picks you up might be the person who keeps you safe, because they already know something you don't. And you may never find out what it was.